Hello everyone. So today my group and I are talking about World War I and how some of the technology's advances the war invented turned out to be negative or, in other words, very destructive. My group is me, Jana,
Yara,
and Zebazi. First, before we get into the negative tech, let's talk about how World War I began. Let's dive into a brief recap of WW1. Tensions grew between Austria-Hungary and Serbia because Serbia wanted to unite Slavic people, including those in Austria-Hungary, into one state. After a Serbian nationalist, Gavrilo Princip, assassinated Austria's heir Archduke Franz Ferdinand, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. Within a week, most of Europe was pulled into the conflict. During the war, many alliances, so as technologies, most of which were for war use, were built up, but not all of them were for good use.
One example of these many negative technologies are tanks. Tanks were first used by the British in World War I during the Battle of the Somme to break through enemy lines and cross no man's land. They were powerful and hard to destroy, but very slow and couldn't handle soft ground. Tanks also caused a lot of harm to people, wildlife, and the environment. Using tanks became a way for countries to show off their strength and new technology. How does that relate to nationalism? Countries wanted to prove their military and technological superiority over others. So, tanks weren't just weapons, they were symbols of national pride and power. Another example of these negative techs would be machine guns. Machine guns, which were first used in World War I, allowed rapid firing of bullets, increasing the number of injuries in battles. Dangerous groups have also used them, spreading fear and trauma, and they don't follow old war rules that respect enemies and civilians. Governments spend a lot on these weapons instead of things like schools and healthcare, and they're easy for criminals to misuse. How can we relate that to nationalism? Countries may use machine guns to show off their military strength. However, these weapons bring serious issues for society and safety.
On April 22, 1915, German troops used deadly gas against Allied forces at Ypres, causing panic and new challenges on the battlefield. The gas, often in liquid form, was delivered by artillery shells, releasing toxic fumes upon impact. This chemical warfare caused severe injuries and deaths, affecting soldiers, civilians, and the environment. But how does that relate to nationalism? Especially for Germany? Countries used poisonous gas in World War I to demonstrate their power and prove they could endure extreme suffering without surrendering. This deadly weapon showed that each nation was determined to resist defeat and protect its people and resources. For many, the goal was to show resilience and strength compared to their rivals. By using gas, Germany and other countries wanted to prove they were strong and wouldn't be seen as weak. In a way, it was about pride and showing loyalty to their country by not backing down, no matter the cost.
Bombs were also another example of negative tech advance, mostly used and developed in World I. Bombs were first dropped from the air during the Turkish-Italian War in 1911, but they became more common in World War I, starting with bombing missions like the German attack on Liege in 1914. Bombs cause a lot of destruction, are inaccurate, and can harm innocent people, animals, and buildings. They also contribute to air pollution and environmental damage, including soil and water contamination. The connection to nationalism is that countries use bombs to quickly show their strength and pride in their nation during the war. This led to widespread destruction and poor planning, as they focus more on power than the impact on people and the environment.
Lastly, we have trenches. Now, I know this may sound like a lie, but it's actually true. Trenches were first used extensively during World War I, especially starting in 1914, and they changed how wars were fought, making battles last longer with more resistance or of attrition. Soldiers had to endure terrible conditions, always fearing enemy fire, which led to mental stress known as shell shock, now PTSD. The old-fashioned fighting strategies and trench digging caused long-term environmental damage. Rats and other animals resided with them in those trenches, and sometimes, the enemy would drain poison in the soil towards the other side's trench to kill them from inside. Turns out what was supposed to be a protection for soldiers during the war turned out to be instead a weapon against them. Nationalism is depicted here as we observe how countries used trenches to protect soldiers, but they also treated them as tools in a war for power. This caused unnecessary suffering and showed how nations prioritized victory over soldiers' well-being.
In conclusion, these powerful technologies can also be harmful and destructive, causing harm to soldiers, civilians, and the environment. These advances were all about showing power, but they caused suffering and didn't always help win the war.
During World War I, many new technologies like tanks, machine guns, bombs, and trenches were introduced, but they had serious negative effects. Tanks and machine guns caused more harm and fear, while bombs were destructive and polluting. Trenches created horrible conditions for soldiers, leading to mental trauma and environmental damage.
Nationalism can perpetuate this cycle by encouraging countries to seek out newer and more powerful technologies as a way to maintain their superiority, resulting in the development of increasingly destructive weapons. That's all for now. Bye everyone.